Montana Territory, 1880. Willah Foster stood at the edge of the dusty street in Fort Benton, her fingers clenched around the telegram that had shattered the last safe corner of her world. "You have until Friday to agree, or I call in the debt. C.J." Mallory, the wind tugged at her skirts, but she did not move. The banker's words burned through her chest, sinking deeper than fear. He had waited until her father's grave was still fresh in the ground before making his threat. Her family's ranch, the home her parents had built from timber and sweat, was drowning in debt her father had hidden from her. And now Mallory wanted it all, unless she agreed to marry him. She turned and stepped back into the telegraph office, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. The man behind the counter flinched when he saw her face. "Miss Foster, was there a reply from Miles City?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, not yet." Willah turned and left without another word. Out on the boardwalk, her little brother and sister waited in the wagon. Zadie, just 9, was braiding a ragged doll's hair. Zeb, 11, sat stiff beside her, his jaw tight and protective. They looked more like orphans every day. She climbed up beside them. "Home," she said softly, and Zeb flicked the reins. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The sun sank lower with every mile, casting long shadows over the hills. The house came into view, weather-beaten, small, but still standing. She could not let Mallory take it. She would rather let it burn. She got the children settled with supper while the wind whispered through the windows. She stared at the letter again, her heart pounding. She had no family left to turn to, no money, no options, unless she stepped outside and into the barn. Her mare nickered softly. She reached up and touched the worn leather saddle. Her father had taught her to ride before she could walk. He had said the land would always provide if you respected it, but the land had not prepared her for men like C.J. Mallory. The next morning, the banker arrived. He rode with 2 men behind him and a coat too fine for the dirt under his boots. He dismounted like he owned the place already. Willah stood on the porch, arms crossed. "Miss Foster," he said, smiling without warmth. "Have you come to a decision?" "I will not marry you." His smile faded. "Then I will collect what is owed in full by sundown Friday." "You are a cruel man." "I am a businessman," he said. "And you are running out of time." She did not watch him leave. She was too busy trying not to cry in front of her siblings. That night, she rode again into town under cover of darkness. She had heard whispers in the saloon of a man who helped folk in trouble, a man with no home but the saddle. A man who had stood against outlaws and won. She found him outside the blacksmith's, leaning against the hitching post, sharpening a blade by lantern light. His hat sat low over his brow, but she saw the square line of his jaw, the sun-darkened skin, and the quiet steadiness in how he moved. "Are you Varen Ellery?" she asked. He looked up. His eyes were a green-gray, like a storm over the prairie. "I am. My name is Willah Foster. I need help." He slid the knife back into its sheath. "What kind of help?" "A banker is trying to force me into marriage to erase a debt. If I do not agree, he will take my home. My brother and sister have nowhere else to go." He studied her, not saying a word for a long moment. "I have nothing to offer you," she added. "You have your name," he said slowly, "and he wants it." She nodded. He stepped closer. "If you marry me, the debt dies. He cannot collect if you are no longer legally capable of signing it away." Her breath caught. "You would marry a stranger?" "I have nothing tying me anywhere," he said, "but I do not like seeing a good woman threatened. And I sure as hell will not let a man like Mallory win." Willah's voice shook. "You would do that for me." "I would," he said. "But only if you are willing. I will not trap you the way he tried to." She looked up at him. Honest eyes, a voice as steady as the land, no promises, just truth. "I will marry you," she said. The next morning, they stood before the preacher in a small wooden church with cracked windows and dust in the corners. Zadie held her hand. Zeb stood behind Varen, shoulders straight. When the preacher asked if she took this man to be her husband, Willah looked up at Varen and said, "I do." His voice followed, low and sure. "I do." They signed the papers. The preacher stamped the seal. The moment they stepped outside, she saw Mallory across the street. His face twisted when he saw their joined hands. "You cannot do this," he snarled. "I already did," Varen said. "She is my wife. The debt belongs to neither of us now." Mallory stormed off, but not before spitting at the ground near her boots. Willah's hand tightened on Varen's. He looked down at her. "You all right?" "I think so," she said. "Thank you," he nodded. "Let us head home." And just like that, she had a husband, a stranger, and her land was safe. The ride back was quiet, but not cold. Zadie dozed with her head against Willah's arm, and Zeb sat beside Varen, asking questions about horses and rifles. Varen answered everyone. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting gold across the hills. Varen helped Zadie down from the wagon, lifting her gently. Willah watched him. His hands were rough, but he was careful with her sister, like she was something worth protecting. "You do not have to stay," she said later when they stood alone by the barn. "I know," he said, "but I will." "Why?" He looked out over the land. "Because I have not had a place that felt like home in years, and maybe this could be one." Willah swallowed hard. "I do not know how to be a wife." "I do not expect you to be anything but yourself," he said quietly. She nodded. "All right." He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "We will take it one day at a time." And somehow, with that one sentence, the knot in her chest loosened just a little. That night he slept in the barn. She lay awake inside, listening to the wind, thinking about his voice, the way he had looked at her when she said, "I do," like he had meant something by it. She did not know this man, but she had seen his courage. And something inside her, a buried, battered hope, began to stir. The morning after the wedding, a thin frost clung to the fence rails, and the sky was the pale gray of unspoken thoughts. Varen stood at the edge of the corral, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hammering a loose board back into place. A line of breath rose from his mouth with each swing, but his motions stayed even, methodical. Willah watched from the porch, arms wrapped around Zadie, who was still half asleep and muttering about a dream involving a fox and a pie. Zeb had gone out to check the traps near the creek, eager to prove useful with a rifle Varen had let him hold the night before. She stepped down and crossed the yard, her boots damp from the grass. Varen noticed her and set the hammer aside. "I can take that from here," she said, nodding toward the fence. "You could," he replied, brushing sawdust from his hands, "but it's already done." "Does fixing things come that easy for you?" "Only if they're built of pine and iron," he said. "People are harder." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. "There's still mending to do in the south field, the wires sagging." "I'll ride out after breakfast," he said. "Show me where." They walked together toward the house. She didn't offer coffee, there wasn't any left, and he didn't ask. Inside, the kitchen carried the smell of salt pork and cornmeal. Willah stirred the pot while Zadie fed scraps to the barn cats crouched outside the door. Varen sat at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with one finger. "How long since you've slept in a proper bed?" she asked without turning. 5 years, give or take." "Why?" "Some men look for places to belong, others wait to be asked." She glanced over. "And which are you?" "I reckon I was the latter until yesterday." Zadie climbed onto the bench beside him, her hands sticky from molasses. "Did you ever shoot an outlaw?" He looked down at her, then over at Willah. "Only the ones who didn't offer peace first." Zadie seemed satisfied with that. Willah handed him a plate, her fingers brushing his as she did. He didn't flinch. Later, they rode to the edge of the property where the dry grass gave way to scrub and stone. The sagging wire stretched low between leaning posts. Varen dismounted and knelt beside it, testing the tension. Willah crouched beside him, her braid tucked into her collar. "This land don't take kindly to neglect," he said, "but it forgives effort." "My father tried," she said. "He just didn't know when to stop borrowing." He glanced at her. "You don't need to carry his mistakes." "I don't carry them," she said. "I'm dragging them." He didn't offer comfort. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and handed her a pair of gloves. "Help me tighten this line." They worked without speaking, the wire creaking as they pulled it taut. The sun rose higher, warm on their backs. When they finished, they stood up together, hands raw but the fence standing firm again. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat back and studied her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed saving." She met his gaze. "I didn't ask to be saved." "I asked for help," he nodded once. "That's why I agreed." They mounted up and rode back toward the house. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of river mud and wood smoke. A hawk circled above them, silent against the blue. At the barn, Zeb waited, holding something in his hand. It was in the trap by the ravine, he said, lifting the rabbit carefully. Willah inspected it. Good catch, we'll make stew. Varen reached for his knife. Want me to show you how to skin it right? Zeb's eyes lit. Yes, sir. They disappeared around the corner, and Willah stood watching them for a moment, her hands still in the air from where she'd accepted the rabbit. A quiet steadiness settled over her, not hope exactly, but something close. That evening, the stew simmered over the fire, and Varen sat whittling by the hearth. Zadie leaned against his knee, humming tunelessly, while Zeb cleaned the rifle with a cloth and oil, careful the way Varen had shown him. Willah brought out a small mending basket and began stitching a tear in Zeb's coat sleeve. Her fingers moved with practice, but her eyes kept drifting to the man beside the fire. You planning to stay in the barn? She asked. For now, he said. Unless you'd rather I sleep elsewhere, she threaded her needle. The roof leaks in the northeast corner. I wouldn't blame you if you chose the shed. It's dry enough. I've slept under worse. She set the coat aside. I should have asked before we wed. What are you running from? He looked up from his carving, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. Nothing, he said, but I'm still learning what it means to run toward something. She didn't reply. But when the lanterns were dimmed and the children tucked in, she stood at the doorway, watching the barn through the darkness. He hadn't asked for her trust. He hadn't promised anything beyond what they agreed to, but he'd mended the fence. Taught her brother. Sat beside her sister without shifting away. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with pity or possession, it was with something quieter, like respect. She closed the door softly and turned the latch. 3 mornings after the wedding, Willah found Varen in the vegetable patch, kneeling with a spade in one hand and a crooked carrot in the other. The collar of his worn shirt was dark with sweat, and the back of his neck had reddened under the sun. She stood at the gate, arms folded, unsure whether to interrupt. I didn't plant them this close, she said finally. They've grown that way all the same, he replied, holding up the carrot with a raised brow. She stepped through the gate, brushing her skirt away from the rows of sprouting onions. I hadn't touched this garden since spring, thought most of it died. Some things keep trying even when left alone. She crouched beside him and began pulling weeds. Her fingers moved without thought, tugging gently at root and stem. You ever kept a garden before? She asked. No. I've passed through plenty, though, he said. Used to think they were just patches of waiting. Now I see the work in them. She looked over at him. You learn fast. I listen. That settled into the air between them, soft and firm. Later that day, a rider came up the long track from the east. Willah spotted him first from the porch, the dust trailing behind his horse in a pale ribbon. She stepped inside, set the kettle aside, and called for Zeb to stay with Zadie. Varen stood at the gate when the man arrived. The rider dismounted and nodded a greeting, his coat travel worn, his boots caked in dried soil. Name's Conrad Hennedy, he said. I'm with the land office out of Helena. I was sent to verify a change in property claim. Willah joined them as Varen opened the gate. You must be Mrs. Ellery, the man said, tipping his hat. Yes. I'll need to examine the deed, confirm the transfer was voluntary and lawful. There's been concern raised in town. Varen didn't move. By whom, I can't say, the man replied. Only that when a banker files a grievance about unpaid debt being dodged by marriage, we're required to follow up. Willah retrieved the deed from the trunk in the bedroom and handed it over. Hennedy read it carefully, then asked her to recount the terms of the agreement. I married Mr. Ellery willingly, she said, steady. No coercion, the debt is extinguished by law. The man nodded, scratched something on his ledger, and tipped his hat again. Then I'll file it as settled. No further inspection needed. Varen walked him back to his horse. You'll tell Mallory to stop circling, Hennedy mounted. I'll tell him it's done legal. What he does after that's on him. They watched him ride off, the wind flattening the grass behind him. That evening, Willah brought a blanket out to the porch and sat cross-legged with a thimble and needle, patching the worn knees of Zadie's trousers. The scent of rain hovered in the air, though the sky stayed clear. Varen joined her with a tin of warmed beans and 2 spoons. He offered her one and she took it, brushing the edge clean first with her sleeve. You think he'll stop now? She asked. No, Varen said, but he'll be quieter about it. She nodded. That's the kind of quiet I can live with. They ate in silence for a while, listening to the creak of the porch timbers and the soft shuffle of cattle near the lower fence line. Then Willah set the spoon aside and leaned back against the post. When I was younger, I used to think I'd marry someone who could read poetry out loud, she said, voice low. My mother loved poems. She'd tuck them into the flour tin and under my pillow. But my father said poems didn't put food on a table. Varen didn't smile, but he looked at her like he could see the memory still sitting on her shoulder. I can't recite poems, he said, but I can fix a broken yoke and shoot a coyote at dusk. That worth something? She turned her head, met his eyes. It's worth more. A gust of wind lifted the edge of the blanket, and she pulled it tighter around her legs. Do you miss the road? She asked. Sometimes I miss the way it doesn't ask anything of me. And this place does. Yes, he said, but I like what it asks. She didn't reply, but her foot brushed against his under the blanket, and neither of them moved it away. When the stars came out, she stood and folded the blanket. Before stepping inside, she paused. There's space by the hearth, she said. Warmer than the barn. He watched her go, then rose and followed. Inside, Zeb was already asleep in the loft, and Zadie curled in a quilt beside the stove. Willah laid down another pillow near the fire, and Varen took his bedroll from the hook by the door. She didn't speak again as she climbed the ladder to the sleeping loft. But when she looked down once more, he was already lying back, one arm behind his head, eyes closed. She turned toward the rafters, her heart not yet steady but no longer running. Something had rooted in the quiet between them, not love, not yet but the shape of its beginning. By the following week, the first snow had come early, a quiet curtain over the hills that muffled the world into stillness. The garden was finished, the barn stacked with chopped wood, and the last of the potatoes stored in the root cellar. With each day that passed, Varen's presence settled deeper into the rhythm of the ranch, not as a guest or an obligation, but as a man who understood how to listen to the land and to the lives rooted in it. Zeb had taken to rising before sunrise, eager to ride fence lines or learn how to read tracks in the snow. Zadie had started spelling her own name in the soot on the windowpane, tracing crooked letters with a fingertip, while Varen showed her how to hold a knife safely or gather eggs without cracking them. One evening, Willah sat at the table with her account ledger open, a candle flickering low beside her. She tapped her pencil against the page, eyes scanning the last column. The numbers didn't lie, they were lean, but not hopeless. She hadn't dared look at this ledger for months. Varen had not asked to see it. He had simply brought in what he could and accepted no praise. She didn't look up when he entered, brushing snow from his shoulders. You trust me enough to read those numbers? He asked. I trust the numbers more than most men, she said. But you haven't given me reason not to. He pulled off his gloves and hung his coat. We'll need to sell 2 more calves if the roof's to be patched before spring. I know, she said. I've been trying to decide which ones. He poured water from the kettle into the basin, washed his hands without speaking. When he dried them, he leaned against the wall and studied her face. You ever think about letting someone else carry part of this? He asked. She set the pencil down. I don't know how. Learning's not shameful. She met his eyes, something wary flickering behind hers. When your whole life has been holding things together, it's hard to hand over even a corner. He crossed the room, slow and measured, and took a seat across from her. You're not failing, Willah, you're surviving. There's a difference. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what I'm doing. You don't have to, he said. We work it out one piece at a time. The candle guttered low. She closed the ledger. When I was 16, she said, I asked my father if he thought I'd ever leave this place. He said leaving wasn't in our blood, but I think I only asked because I was already dreaming of it. You still dream of it, sometimes, she admitted, but dreams change. I used to want to be somewhere no one knew my name. Now I think I just want to be somewhere it means something. Varen reached for the lantern and trimmed the wick. It means something here. She nodded slowly, almost to herself. That night, she didn't wait for him to settle by the hearth. Instead, she laid out another blanket beside hers in the loft and left the ladder unlatched. She didn't speak when he climbed the rungs, and he didn't ask questions when he lay beside her, a respectful space between them. But in the early hours, when the wind howled down from the ridgeline and rattled the shutters, she shifted closer just enough that her shoulder touched his. He didn't move away. In the morning, Zeb was already outside, chasing the hens off the steps, and Zadie was singing to herself while she swept ash into the scuttle. Willah stood beside the stove, hands wrapped around a mug of boiled coffee, and watched Varen tie his boots. "You ever think of going back east?" she asked. "No one waiting there," he said. "And I never took to cities. Too many walls, not enough sky." She set the mug down. "There's a winter dance in town next week. The school teacher is organizing it for the families." He looked up from the laces. "You asking? I'm telling you I'm going," she said. "Whether you plan to stand with me or not is your own decision." He smiled gentle, no pride in it, just warmth. "Then I'll need to borrow a coat that doesn't stink of horses." "Your coat is fine," she said, then paused. "You're fine." The words sat between them, unadorned. She didn't take them back, and he didn't let them drift away. He stood and reached for his hat. "Then I'll see you there." She watched him walk out into the snow, his footprints filling slowly behind him. She touched the edge of the table where he'd sat the night before, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was bracing for something to fall apart. Instead, she felt the shape of something steady being built quietly, piece by piece, like fence posts sunk in frost-hardened soil. The town hall's windows glowed amber against the snow-packed street, and the sound of fiddles carried into the crisp night air as Willah tied her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her fingers trembled faintly, not from cold, but from something else. She hadn't stepped into a gathering like this since, before her mother took ill. More than 5 years gone, and still the memory of laughter under lamplight felt like something distant and delicate. Varen stood beside her in a borrowed coat that didn't quite fit his shoulders, but he wore it like it belonged to him. He held the door open, and she stepped inside first. The room was warm, smells of beeswax and pine mingling with the sweet tang of baked apples. Lanterns hung from crossbeams, casting soft shadows across the walls. Children weaved between benches, and neighbors she hadn't seen since the thaw nodded her way. No one brought up the banker, no one whispered about the marriage. That silence, she felt, had been earned. "You want to sit or dance?" Varen asked, his voice low. "I'm not sure I remember how," she said. "You don't forget," he replied. "You just stop trying." He offered his hand. She placed hers in it, unsure what surprised her more, that he'd asked or that she'd said yes. They moved slowly at first, the music a waltz played with more heart than polish. Willah's steps were stiff, but his hand steadied at her waist, not pressing, just present. She let herself follow, her body remembering the rhythm before her mind did. "You used to dance?" she asked quietly. "Once," he said. "A long time ago, before I knew how much standing still could cost a man." She glanced up. "And now I know what it's worth." They danced until the fiddler changed tunes and the tempo quickened. Varen stepped back, giving her space. A younger couple took the floor, laughter bubbling between them. Willah led him to a bench near the stove, where they peeled off gloves and sat close enough to share warmth without touching. A woman passed them mugs of cider, and Varen thanked her with a nod. "I saw you talking with Mr. Lattimore earlier," Willah said. "He asked if I'd consider helping him through calving season, said the ranch hands he hired left for the mines. You said no." I said not yet. "I don't want to start anything that pulls me from here." She turned her cup slowly in her hands. "You don't owe this place anything." "I owe you," he said, "and I'd rather put roots down than keep chasing dust." She didn't speak right away. Then she said, "I never imagined being married to someone who'd let me choose the pace." "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said. "I'm here if you want to build something with me." The room filled with clapping as another tune ended, and Willah set her empty mug on the windowsill. "I want to go home," she said softly. He stood without asking why. Outside, the moon lit the snow in silver tones. They walked quietly, the crunch of their boots the only sound between them, until the house came into view, candlelight flickering behind the frost-rimmed windows. Inside, Zeb was asleep on the bearskin mat, a book open on his chest. Zadie snored softly in the trundle beside the stove, clutching a wooden horse Varen had carved days before. Willah hung her shawl and turned to him. "There's no separate bed tonight," she said. He nodded. "All right." They climbed the loft ladder in silence. She lit the small oil lamp and pulled the blanket back. He sat beside her, hands resting on his knees, waiting. "I used to think I'd never trust anyone again," she said, voice barely above the wind outside. "Every time I leaned on someone, they left or let me down. I'm not leaving," he said. "I know, that's what I'm trying to get used to." She turned, reached for his hand. He took it, his thumb brushing the ridge of her knuckles. "I want this," she said. "Not just the safety, not just the help. I want you, all of it." His hand tightened around hers. "Then you have me." She leaned in, and he met her halfway. The kiss was unhurried, quiet like everything between them, not the start of something wild, but a promise finally spoken. In the weeks that followed, the house filled with a steadier rhythm. Varen repaired the porch before the deep freeze set in. Willah taught Zadie to read by lamplight, while Zeb learned how to saddle his pony without help. They traded with the neighboring ranch for seed and salted meat, and Varen built a proper smokehouse behind the barn. In early spring, Willah planted new rows in the garden, her hands in the soil from first light. Varen joined her after chores, sleeves rolled, sweat at the back of his neck. They worked side by side, speaking little but reaching for each other in the quiet spaces between. One morning, as the creek thawed and the first green returned to the hills, Willah sat at the kitchen table, a folded letter in her lap. "It's from the Helena office," she said when Varen entered. He poured water into the basin and waited. "They're offering a grant for widowed ranchers starting over. Equipment, seed, tools. If we file together, we qualify." He wiped his hands. "Is that what you want?" She looked up at him, tired in a way that came from hope, not weariness. "I want to build a future that's ours. Not one I'm borrowing from someone else." "Then we'll do it," he said. Together, and they did. They never left the ranch. They didn't need to. The land grew with them, slow, stubborn, and full of quiet grace. They raised calves that winter, taught Zadie to ride. Watched Zeb take up his father's rifle and learn to aim true. Every morning, Varen rose before the sun and brought Willah coffee with a whisper of steam still rising. Every night she waited for him in the loft, her hand outstretched, her eyes steady. Their love wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was built the way fences are, post by post, bound with wire and work, and made to last through every season. And it did.